Hi, my name is Casey Foote, and I have a learning disability and ADHD. So to speak about first is, why do you think people with learning disabilities are overlooked? Well, one big thing about learning disabilities is there's nothing physical or visible that you would know someone has a learning disability. Any person can have a learning disability. So that's one thing. Is sometimes when someone is talking to someone with a learning disability, they just automatically assume, because they don't realize, that that person is slow or dumb, or why are they maybe pausing to think about stuff, and they don't realize that it could be a learning disability. So my learning disability, as I mentioned, my learning disability, that's one thing about learning disabilities, it's a very broad term. My personal learning disability deals with writing, reading, and how I process information. So one big thing is, it doesn't mean that I can't write or read or process information. I do it differently. So for me, my handwritten writing is very messy, so I rely a lot on technology and using typing and written output. For reading, again, I can read, but I process information much slower, so I prefer using programs that have text-to-speech that read to me, because my brain processes auditory information and visual information much quicker than when I have to use my own skills to read and my visual perception of my eyes to read. For the writing, or sorry, not the writing, the processing part, again, I can process information, but I might process it a bit slower, or I just need more time to maybe read it over 2 or 3 times to understand it. Again, it doesn't mean I can't, it means I just process it differently. And that's, I think, really, speaking to social work and disabilities, we know all types of disabilities. It's not that they can't do it, it's just that they do it differently. Just looking at some of the stuff I wanted to go over. Barriers that I might possibly face. I'm lucky, I have figured out a lot of ways to overcome barriers, but I know for me, like a barrier that I might face, for example, I've dealt with it in an interview. If that interview requires me to write by hand, I know for me, I automatically now bring a laptop or some type of device to type on, and I will tell an employer, I am suitable for this job, I can do it, but I will need to use some type of technology to get my written output out. So that is one thing that I have to do personally. So a negative story pertaining to my learning disability, it's going to be a lot to do with education. I know, well, let's start with education. I probably can think of one outside of education. So for me, especially, I have been diagnosed with learning disability since I was 12 years old, so it'll be close to 14 years. Even 14 years ago, they were still trying to understand how learning disabilities worked and how learning disabilities affected a child in the classroom. So I know for me, before, and even when I was diagnosed, but especially before I was diagnosed, I remember for me, one vivid thing is grade 6. I remember very vividly that teacher, obviously I'm not going to put her down, I'm not putting down teachers at all, is she did not understand why I was not pertaining the information. She especially, an example, I would be sitting in class and we would be going over a lesson, and I wouldn't have my hand up because I most of the time had a hard time following along with the lesson. So she would call on me to see if I was paying attention, and then for me, I would get nervous and then not be able to answer and go, and then she would go, oh, Casey, we went over this 3 times. This is the 3rd time we've gone over this lesson. Why do you not understand this? And I know for me that was a hugely brought down my self-esteem. That year I definitely started to think I was stupid, that I couldn't learn. Unfortunately, too, because of all those moments in class, I became a target for a particular bully and was on a regular basis told I was stupid. Why am I in this class? So I know for me that was very, very hard and automatically just assumed by both the teacher and some of my classmates that I was stupid. So sometimes that would happen. I know later on, once I was diagnosed with a learning disability, one thing I can remember being judged, especially because I was kind of a guinea pig in my school board for using a specialized laptop. So I remember lots of teachers not understanding. I remember one teacher accused me of being a hacker and thought I was cheating, but I wasn't. I was using it as a device to support my learning. I remember another example. So this wasn't even technology based. I remember in grade 11 or 12 English. So we were doing Romeo and Juliet. So I was really, really into this. That's one thing is when I'm given the right format, I can very much comprehend the information I'm doing. So I remember we were taking up one of the chapters in Romeo and Juliet, and the teacher asked a question, a very detailed question. And I put up my hand and answered it, and he looked at me really confused, and then went, "Miss Foot, did you take this course before? Is this your second time taking the course?" I said, "No, this is my first time taking the course." He's like, "Wow, that was a perfect answer. That was very detailed." So I think the thing is, especially in high school, children with both disabilities and especially learning disabilities, teachers do not always understand or read their IEP, so their individual education plan. So I think it was a mixture of that teacher either did not read my IEP, and in my case, I was held back a year. So he assumed because I was a year older that that was my second time taking the course and didn't realize that that wasn't the case and that I would just really liked English and I was actually pretty good at English classes. Those were some of my highest marks during high school. So I think that is typically a perception that happens. I know for me, so in public, sometimes when I have to fill out, say like maybe I have to go to the bank or go to Service Ontario and fill out forms, I usually don't get comments, but I have gotten funny looks when I fill out forms because sometimes they're quite messy that people look at me and, "Really, this is your writing?" So that is an example of how I've had some judgment, even though my intelligence is quite high. And that's one thing too, people assume if you have a learning disability, you have low intelligence, but that is, in most cases, that's not the case. You have average intelligence, if not high intelligence. So I know I've got funny looks, and one thing I know I've dealt with is when I have to call maybe like customer service or call lines and I have to give out numbers, I struggle. Another part of my learning disability is I struggle sometimes with mathematics and numeracy or memorizing numbers. And before I've fumbled, like I remember I was on the line and I had to give a number out and I fumbled about 5 times. And the customer service rep got so upset. He's like, "That is wrong. Why didn't you write that right?" And the funny thing is this was a customer service rep for Dragon. So Dragon is a speech-to-text program. And a big part with that technology is that a lot of the people that use it have a learning disability or type of disability. So it was really sad to think that someone that was on a customer service rep didn't have the patience to understand that maybe I was struggling because of how I learn or that I had a disability. So I had to cut him off, and I actually ended up hanging up on him because I was so upset. So it's just really sad that I know for me, I know a lot about the disability laws in Ontario and everything, but I find one thing that's missing is people understanding that you're going to also service people with learning disabilities and understanding too that you're not going to know right away that they have a learning disability. So going to what I do for a living, so I was very much blessed. So I finished off, and that's one thing too that people assume you have a learning disability, you're not educated. So I went off to Mohawk College. I did a year of computer sciences, and then I finished off my social service worker diploma. So once I was done school, only about 3 months after I was done school, I landed a job with a company called LearnStyle. So LearnStyle is our main training is an educational training company, and we get contracted by school boards to do specialized education technology training. So I am blessed. What I do is most of my job is, a big part of it is I rotate between 10 to 20 schools, and I work with students with special education needs, and especially students with learning disabilities, some students with disabilities like autism, Down syndrome, and I teach them how to use specialized devices and technologies to support their learning. So I feel very blessed to give them that, and I know for me, I would not be here talking to you and talking about working full-time if it was not for technology. And that is honestly to another barrier that especially people with learning disabilities or people that need specialized format deal with a lot is, for example of myself. So for me, when I do exams or tests, I would always use a computer or device to do them. So for Twice for work, I have had to go and get my CPR certification. So I can do all the hands-on stuff, no problem. I have everything down. I can revive someone, all that stuff. But when it comes to the written test, what I've run into twice is I've done CPR with St. John's and there's two or three different agencies that do it. So I go and ask them, because I'll bring my laptop, do you have an electronic format of the test? Maybe a PDF version? No, we don't have that. So it's really hard because I know that's part of the Ontario Disability Act is companies are supposed to have accessible format. But unfortunately, that's still not happening. I have lucked out where with the CPR courses, they're usually very nice and they say, oh, we'll read it to you or you can take extra time. But it's really frustrating that in this day and age of technology that we still don't offer a PDF format of tests, or having the option to, me being a technology trainer, it doesn't take much to go and scan a test and then save it onto a USB, but that's beyond the point. But that's a huge barrier that especially people with learning disabilities that deal with reading and writing and they struggle with it, we need that type of format. So that's something that people, again, have to deal with. And going into the workforce, again, I'm lucky I have a job that's very accommodating because of what I do. I'm allowed to use the technology that I need. And again, I'll give an example. During interviews, I will bring that up if I have to do written stuff, that's a part of what I need. I need technology to write. So just thinking. So I think the biggest thing I would want any potential employer, social services to know is just understand too, a person with a learning disability, typically too, I'm the type, I'm pretty comfortable with it. I will tell people that I have a learning disability and ADHD, but be prepared that that's the thing. There's nothing physical about a person with a learning disability. They're typically not going to tell you. But again, if someone's talking slow, maybe they seem to be sitting there reading for a while, they seem very resistant to writing, there is a chance that they could have a learning disability. So just understanding that. And the biggest thing too, it takes time, but I think the biggest thing I hope to see maybe in 5 years, maybe a little bit more, that all companies and agencies have electronic format of all their material. Because I think that's huge, not just for people with learning disabilities, anyone that needs format in that electronic format. It just makes sense because the way I see it is an accommodation that works for someone with special needs just is beneficial to everyone.
Can they
Contact me? If you would like to talk to me about possibly what my company does, LearnStyle, or what I do privately, you can contact me at my email. So it's all lowercase, the letters KCFOOTE10@gmail.com. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.